Mandukasana, also known as frog pose, is the ultimate hip opener. And if this pose has been a huge challenge for you, you are not alone. It can be incredibly difficult to get your inner thighs and hips to open up. And one of the even harder parts is to get your mind to get out of your way and let you relax into this pose. In ancient yogic tradition, it is said that a lot of emotions are stored in our hips. So it is not uncommon to feel frustrated, angry, sad, a whole roller coaster of emotions when you're doing hip opening poses like frog pose. That being said, we have lots of incredible tips to help you modify and adjust this pose to meet your needs, to make it easier for you, and ultimately to help you reap all the awesome benefits. Welcome back to the Yoga Nomads. I'm Logan Haley, and today I am your guide on this journey through massive hip opening. But real quick, we want to talk about the benefits of frog pose because I was actually pretty impressed by the research out there related to Mandukasana. So frog pose obviously opens your hips, that's a given, but it helps with your lower back pain because it activates a part of your lumbar spine that actually gets really crunched down when you're seated. So as you release the groin, it's also going to send a radiating soothness, hopefully, up through the lower spine. Another science-backed benefit is improving your digestion. So frog pose activates your core and stimulates all of those digestive organs, which can be great for after you ate a big meal or you're dealing with bloating or menstrual cramps. Now, one other really cool benefit is that frog pose can actually help improve your sex life for both men and women. So it may be a surprise that something as unsexy as frog pose would be useful in the bedroom, but let me explain the concept behind this. Frog pose activates the sacral or second chakra, which is associated with creativity and sexuality and all of that beautiful kundalini energy. And as you sink into frog pose, it strengthens the pelvic floor and opens up the groin, which ultimately can result in a better experience in the bedroom. So with that, let's dive into that kundalini energy and all of the hip opening, back pain relieving enjoyment of frog pose. Now, getting into frog pose is really quite simple as long as you maintain the proper alignment and you use props if you need them. The number one complaint that you'll hear from people trying to do frog pose is that it hurts your knees. And yes, that is true, especially if you are on a hard floor or your mat is fairly thin. This cork yoga mat is one of my all-time favorites because it provides enough padding for my knees, but I'll also show you how to use these props if you have a knee injury or you're extra sensitive. So first you're gonna start in a tabletop position. Now in a yoga class, it is common to do this on your mat from a horizontal standpoint, but of course for demonstration purposes, I'm gonna go this way. Do whatever feels right for you. So your wrists are gonna be lined up underneath your shoulders and your knees are gonna be under your hips before you start spreading them wide. So in this case, I'm gonna go wider than the mat, and then I'm gonna bring my ankles out so they're in line with my knees as well. This is where you instantly may feel that you need some knee support. So grab some bolsters or blankets, or if you have yoga knee pads, those can be awesome. And these will actually help you slide on the floor if you have really flexible hips that you want to deepen the pose in. If you don't want to slide, I recommend using a bolster or placing the blankets on your mat. So once I widen my stance, you can see that I don't want to keep my feet together. I want to make sure they're out here and my feet are flexed. That is one of the unsexy parts of frog pose, but that actually makes a huge difference in the angle of your hips. So now that my knees are nice and cozy and my ankles are in line with my pause. So now that my knees are nice and supported and my feet are flexed outward, I'm ready to start sinking backwards. So depending on your flexibility level, you can come down to your forearms or you can stay up here and just slowly start pushing back. I like to come down and you kind of have to play around to find your sweet spot here. So you can rock back and forth a little bit as you feel your hip flexors open. You usually don't want to do this pose without warming up, so be sure you stay tuned for some of our favorite warm-up poses before diving into this. But as you lean back, you're sucking in your core and you're feeling this deep stretch in the groin. Now, if this is crazy uncomfortable, you can always bring your knees closer together, or you can widen the stance. Just play around with it until you find the sweet spot. Once you get there, it's really a matter of breathing, holding, and fighting your mental urge to not jump out of it, because it can be a little intense. It shouldn't be painful, but it can be intense. So, breathe with me now, and let's just hold this for 3 breaths together. And again, if you feel too much resistance, come out of it by either pulling your body forward or bringing your knees closer together. Exhale deeper. On the inhale, you can come up a little bit. Exhale, engaging the core and the quads. Relax your neck as well. You only want to sink in those hips. Everything else can kind of calm down. To get out of the pose, it's easy to just come back onto your hands like a tabletop and then slowly step your knees together. You might need to wiggle it out a little bit, and boom, you've learned how to do frog pose. So here are some other modifications. Now, if that is just way too intense for you, I totally understand. That is why we have yoga props to modify frog pose. So, my first and favorite modification is with bolsters. You will need 2 of them, but if you don't have any yoga bolsters, you can always check out our review on the yoganomads.com for the best ones you can order online, or you can just use some pillows. So, sitting in the middle of your bolsters, bring them just a couple inches wider than your hips. These are gonna provide you more stability and ensure that you don't sink deeper than you want to into the pose. So I'm in my tabletop, and now I'm gonna bring my knees onto the bolsters, flex those feet, and begin to sink down. Again, I don't have to worry about my knees sliding wider than I want them to, thank God. I can just chill here and move these bolsters a little closer or wider apart depending on what's comfortable. Now, my second favorite modification is the restorative frog pose. This is great if you just want to chill out, practice in bed, or just enjoy a little bit of hip flexor opening without the intensity of the full frog pose. So you're just going to come down, flatten your stomach. I'm not going to go all the way down because of my mic, but basically you just bring that knee out to the side, aligned with the hip, and then bring your ankle out to be in line with your knee. You can slightly flex your foot if you want to, or you can just let it relax, and your other hip just stays flat to the ground as you sink down and relax into this position. This hip can be adjusted as needed, and you can also use a bolster or a blanket to provide extra knee support, but luckily you don't need it because this just isn't as intense sinking as frog pose. And a third awesome modification is with yoga blocks. So this is my favorite thing for beginners to use because it ensures that you keep your core activated and you're actually checking your stability before you just flop down. We don't want to be floppy frogs, we want to be active frogs. So I'm going to use these blankets for the nice knee support. Beginning in a tabletop position, I'm gonna come down on my elbows and just press into the stability of those blocks. They are gonna make it so much easier for me to stay at a height that is comfortable. Again, not sinking too deep. I can clasp my hands here and then bring the knees onto the blankets, widen those ankles, and flex the feet. So this is where you don't want to flop. This is such a common mistake. Don't arch your back and let everything go. No, press into the blocks and engage your core and keep your spine straight so that your pelvis is in the proper position. You'll feel some activation in the legs, in the thighs. Everything should be a little tense, but not so tense that you're clenched up. So just a light activation in the core engaged. Now I can rock back and forth to find that nice sweet spot, and I can adjust my stance a little more easily with the support of these blocks. Now before you leave, let's talk about how to prepare to get into frog pose and then the counter poses you can do afterwards. So this is a great pose to do after a nice warm up of any type, as long as you've done a yoga flow and your hips aren't totally cold. You may want to do a classic child's pose before or after. You may want to do a nice pigeon pose, which kind of does that external rotation of the hip rather than that groin opening. It's a nice way to just target the full range of the hip flexors. This feels so good before or after a frog pose. Another great option is the yogi squat. So I love getting into this before I do frog pose because my only resistance is gonna be my elbows against the knees instead of the full gravity pulling me down. And it's also great to do just some nice classic forward folds. You can sink to one side to loosen the hips up. And as a final pose after doing frog is the nice wind relieving pose. Oh, it just feels so good, letting your low back sink to the ground and pulling those knees, hugging them towards your chest. So thank you so much for frogging with me today. Mandukasana is definitely a challenging one, but it feels so good once you master it. You might even find yourself craving it. I hope you'll join us next time at the Yoga Nomads, and be sure to check out all of our in-depth yoga pose guides, as well as gear guides and all sorts of tips about the chakras and meditation and mindfulness. Everything you would need to know about enhancing your yoga and spirituality experience. Thank you so much. Namaste.